Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
The call came at 3:47 in the afternoon, 200 feet underground in the Copper Canyon quarry. I remember the exact time because I was checking my watch, calculating the precise moment to detonate the charges I'd spent all morning. Setting .20-3 years, I'd been placing explosives, turning solid rock into manageable pieces. 23 years of controlled destruction, but nothing. Nothing had prepared me for the destruction in Melanie's voice. Asterisk. Rebecca, I can't do this anymore. Her words crackled through the radio static like my own charges going off, except this explosion happened inside my chest. I'm leaving tonight. I'm moving in with Sarah. Sarah, 28 years old. Blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold. The kind off woman who still believed in forever, who hadn't yet learned that promises can crumble like sunstone. Under pressure. Asterisk, I didn't cry. Not then. You don't survive in a man's world correction in what was once a man's world by showing your cracks. I finished my shift, set my charges, and watched 30 tons of limestone become gravel. Controlled destruction. That's what I was good at, but driving home in my old Ford, the truck that Melanie had always said I should replace. Something broke inside me that wasn't so easily controlled. Asterisk 2 miles from the highway, she died on me. Just like that. 18 years of faithful service, and she picked that moment. The moment when I needed her most to give up. Steam rose from under the hood like incense from a funeral pyre. I sat there in the cab, hands still gripping the steering wheel, and finally I let myself feel it all. The emptiness of going home to a house that would echo with absence. The cruel arithmetic of middle age. At 58, how many chances at love do you really have left? Asterisk, that's when I saw her. Walking up the road like something out of a dream, work boots kicking up dust clouds, dark hair escaping from a ponytail, coveralls that couldn't hide the fact that she moved like music given form, asterisk, truck trouble. She called, out, still 30 feet away. Her voice was honey and gravel, sweet but strong. I climbed out, wiping my eyes before she could get close enough to see. Engine overheated. Happens to the best of us. She laughed. Oh, that laugh. Like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Mind if I take a look? I'm Jim Hill. I manage the Carson Quarry, but I've been fixing engines since I could hold a wrench. 28 years old. I could see it in the way she moved, all contained energy and easy confidence. The same age as Sarah, the same age as the woman who had just stolen my life away. Asterisk, but when Jamie popped the hood and bent over the engine, there was something different in how she carried herself. This wasn't youth playing at competence. This was mastery, quiet and sure. Your radiator hose is shot, she said, tracing a finger along the split rubber. But I think I can jury-rig something to get you home. She looked up at me then, and I saw something that made me breath catch. Recognition. Not of who I was, but of something deeper. A kinship, perhaps. You're Rebecca Green, aren't you? The explosives expert at Copper Canyon? Asterisk, you know my work. No. It? She straightened, wiping her hands on a rag that materialized from her pocket. I've been following your career for years. That controlled demolition you did at the Martinez site? The one where you brought down that old mill building with surgical precision? I studied the footage for weeks, trying to understand your technique. Nobody had ever said that to me before. In 23 years of professional excellence, I'd received acknowledgement, respect, even awards. But never admiration. Never the kind of recognition that saw not just what I did, but how I thought. Asterisk, she worked on my truck for the better part of an hour, her hands sure and steady, occasionally asking me to hold a part or pass her a tool. Talked about our work, about the satisfying cling of making stubborn things bend to your will. I found myself watching her fingers, stained with honest grease, and feeling something I hadn't felt in, well, in years. Interest. Asterisk, when she finally got the engine running again. I stood there like a fool, not wanting the memento end. The sun was setting behind her, painting her hair with copper highlights, and I thought about time. About how it moves differently when you're 58 and looking at someone who has decades ahead of her. Thank you, I said, meaning more than just the repair. She smiled, and it was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. No problem. We take care of each other in this business, right? Asterisk, as I drove away, watching her figure grow smaller in my rearview mirror, I told myself it was. Just gratitude. Just the kindness of a stranger at a low moment. But my hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and it wasn't from the engine's vibration. Asterisk Melanie took most of our furniture, but she left the silence. Lord, the silence in that house was louder than any explosion I'd ever set off. I rattled around, in rooms that felt too big, too empty, cooking meals for one and pretending it was by choice. But life has a way of providing distraction when you need it most. 3 days after my truck broke down, I got a call from Harrison Construction. They had a job that required both control of demolition and quarry work. A partnership between my expertise and Carson Quarry, Jaima Hills Quarry. Asterisk, I told myself it was just business. Professional collaboration. The fact that my heart jumped ahead when I heard her name on the conference call was incidental. We met at the job site on a Tuesday morning. Jaime arrived in a pickup truck that had seen better decades. But when she stepped out, she moved with the same quiet confidence I remembered. She was wearing work clothes that fit her like they were tailored, and when she shook my hand, her grip was firm and warm. Rebecca, good to see you again. Her smile was professional, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition. Perhaps even pleasure that made my stomach do foolish things. Asterisk, we spent the morning walking the site, discussing angles and timing. She had ideas, good owns. Fresh perspectives that made me see problems I'd been staring at in entirely new ways. More than that, she listened. Really listened, not just to the words, but to the thoughts behind them. You know, she said as we stood, looking at a particularly stubborn outcropping. I've read about your work at similar sites, but seeing you think through a problem in real time, it's like watching an artist's work. Asterisk, I felt my cheeks warm. At 58, being seen, truly seen, was rarer than finding diamonds in quarry rock. It's just experience. No, she turned to face me fully, her dark eyes serious. It's more than that, it's intuition, vision, the ability to see what others can't. We worked together for 3 weeks on that project, and every day brought new conversations. She told me about taking over the family quarry when her father died, how she'd had to prove herself to workers who'd known her since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. I told her about being one of the first women in explosives work, about the casual dismissals, and the way respect had to be earned in fragments. One successful blast at a time. Asterisk, but it wasn't just the professional conversations. There were moments, small ones, easy to dismiss if you wanted to. The way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, how she always seemed to end up standing just a little closer than strictly necessary when we're reviewing plans. The coffee she brought me every morning, prepared exactly how I liked it, even though I'd only mentioned my preferences once. And there was the evening, asterisk, it was our last week on the project. We'd been working late, trying to finish before a storm system moved through. The sun had set, and we were the only ones left on site. Jamie was gathering tools by the light of her truck's headlamps, and I was securing the charges for the next morning's blast. I looked up and she was watching me, wrench forgotten in her hand. What? I asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, it's just double quotes. She shook her head, as if dismissing a thought. You're beautiful when you're concentrating. Your whole face changes, like you're communing with the rock itself. Asterisk, the words hung in the air between us like a held breath. I could have dismissed them, made a joke, pretended they were just professional admiration, but the way she was looking at me, Jamie, I started, but I didn't know how to finish. How do you tell someone 30 years younger that they've awakened something in you that you thought was dead? How do you explain that their casual kindness has become the brightest part of your day? She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, something clean and uncomplicated. Rebecca, that's when my phone rang. Melanie's ringtone. Even though she'd moved out, I hadn't been able to change it yet. The sound shattered. The moment like glass hitting concrete. I should ... I gestured helplessly at the phone. Of course. Jamie stepped back, the spell broken. But something had shifted between us. Something that couldn't be put back in its box. Melanie was calling to arrange picking up the last of her things. During that phone call, standing in the gathering darkness with Jamie's presence still warm beside me, I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt like coming. Home. I was falling in love, again, at 58. With a woman who could be my daughter. I was falling in love. Asterisk, after I hung up. Jaime was leaning against her truck, arms crossed, studying me with those perceptive eyes. Old flame? She asked, trying for casual and not quite making it. Ex-partner, 20 years together. I found myself being honest in a way that surprised me. She left me for someone younger. Ah. Jaime nodded slowly. Someone your age? Someone yours. Asterisk, the silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that holds possibilities, that waits for courage to fill it. Rebecca, Jaime said finally, can I ask you something? I nodded, not trusting my voice. When you look at me, what do you see? Asterisk, it was such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of everything. What did I see? A young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Someone who reminded me of my own lost youth. A professional colleague who happened to be kind. Or did I see something else entirely? I see ... I took a breath, surprised by my own courage. I see someone who understands things that most people don't. Someone who sees beauty in controlled destruction and finds poetry in precision. I see someone who brought me coffee for 3 weeks and somehow always knew exactly how I needed it prepared. Asterisk, and when I look at you looking at me, I see something I haven't seen in a long time. I see someone who sees me. Not my age, not my history, not the things I've lost or failed to hold on to ... just ... not me. She smiled then, slow and sure, and I felt something unlock in my chest. Good, she said. Because when I look at you, I see someone who spent her whole life making careful calculations. Someone who knows exactly where to place the charges to bring down walls without damaging the foundation. She stepped closer, and I see someone who might be ready to let someone else do a little careful demolition of her own. Asterisk, the first time she kissed me, it was nothing like I expected. It wasn't the passionate, desperate kiss of new lovers. It was careful, questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But it was also sure, confident in its own rightness. I didn't pull away. Asterisk, love stories and books make it seem simple, don't they? Two people meet, they fall in love, they overcome obstacles, they live happily ever after, but real love is messy, more complicated, especially when you're 58 and she's 28, and you work in an industry where everyone knows everyone else's business. The gossip started almost immediately. You'd think adults would have better things to do, be apparently. The spectacle of Rebecca Green dating someone young enough to be her daughter was too juicy to resist. Asterisk, cradle robber. I heard whispered behind my back at the quarterly contractors meeting with the crisis. That poor girl, she doesn't know what she's getting into. But the worst part wasn't what they said about me. It was what they said about her. The narrator's voice hardens protectively. Gold digger. Looking for a sugar. Mama. Playing the long game. Anyone who knew Jaime for 5 minutes would know how ridiculous those suggestions were. She ran a successful business, owned her own home, drove that beat-up truck by choice, not necessity. But people see what they want to see, and what they wanted to see was a young woman taking advantage of an older one. The professional sabotage came next. Suddenly, bids that should have been straightforward and complicated, projects that required both our expertise, were mysteriously awarded to companies that could handle only one aspect, requiring subcontracting that somehow never included both of us. Asterisk, I started to wonder if I was being selfish. Jaime was brilliant, talented, at the beginning of what could be an extraordinary career. Did she really need the complication of being associated with me? I tried to bring it up one evening as we sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Purple and gold. We'd been seeing each other for 2 months by then, carefully, quietly, but with growing certainty. Maybe we should slow this down, I said, hating the words as they left my mouth. The talk is getting worse. I don't want it to hurt your business. The narrator's voice softens with memory. She was quiet for a long moment, sipping her beer and watching a hawk circle overhead. Finch turned to me with that direct gaze that always made me feel completely seen. Rebecca, can I tell you something about my father? I nodded. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when I was 25. 6 months to live, the doctor said. He built that quarry from nothing, and suddenly I was looking at losing both him and everything he'd worked for. She set down her beer, her voice steady but emotional. You know what he told me? Asterisk, he said. Jaime, you can live your life trying to make other people comfortable with your choices, or you can live your life making choices that make you comfortable with yourself. But you can't do both. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers strong and sure. Being with you makes me comfortable with myself. Everything else is just noise. Asterisk after that conversation, something shifted between us. Not just acceptance of the challenges we faced, but a kind of defiant joy in choosing each other despite them. We stopped hiding. Not flaunting, but not skulking in shadows either. James started coming to my house for dinner on Sundays. I taught her my grandmother's recipe for pot roast, and she showed me how to change my own oil. We worked on a jigsaw puzzle, a thousand-piece monster of a lighthouse in a storm, and I learned that she hummed while she concentrated. Little melodies that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Asterisk, she had this way of moving through the world that I envied and admired. Where I had learned how cautious to build walls and test ground before proceeding, she was intuitive, trusting her instincts. It should have made us incompatible. Instead, it made us complementary. I remember the night she stayed over for the first time. Not for passion, well, not just forth it, but because a storm had knocked out power in her area, and I'd invited her to wait it out at me place. We'd been seeing each other for 4 months by then, but carefully, slowly, both of us aware of the delicacy of what we were building. Asterisk, she looked so young in my old flannel pajamas, curled up on the couch with a cup of tea and donné of my books. But when she talked about her plans for expanding the quarry, about her vision for sustainable mining practices, there was nothing young about her thoughts. She was brilliant and passionate and completely herself. Can I ask you something? She sighed, looking up from the book, a biography of a female engineer from the 1950s. Always. Do you ever wish you were younger? Asterisk, it was such a loaded question, full of all the insecurities that age gap relationships carry. Did I wish I could give her decades instead of years? Did I wish I had the smooth skin and endless energy of a 28-year-old? Sometimes, I said honestly. But not for the reasons you might think. She set down her tea, giving me her complete attention. I don't wish I was younger, so I could be prettier, or have more energy, or fewer wrinkles. I wish I was younger so I could love you longer. So we could have 50 years together instead of ... however many I have left. Asterisk, she was quiet for a long moment, and I worried I revealed too much too soon. But then she came over and sat beside me on the couch, close enough that I could feel her warmth. Rebecca, she said softly, I've dated women my age. I've dated older women and younger women. I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Not because of your age or despotate, but because of who you are. The woman who brings controlled precision to chaos. Who builds things in carefully, breaks things down, who makes me feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Asterisk, and if all we get is 20 years instead of 50, well, I'd rather have 20 years with you than 50 with anyone else. That's when I knew, really knew. This wasn't infatuation or gratitude or a midlife crisis. This was love, real and deep and worth fighting for. Love, I've learned, is like setting explosives. You can plan meticulously, calculate every variable, but there's always the possibility that something unexpected will happen. That the blast won't go as planned. Our test came 6 months into our relationship in the form of Marcus Webb. Asterisk, Marcus owned Webb Construction, one of the larger companies in our region. He'd been after the state highway expansion contract for 2 years. Massive job that would require both quarry work and controlled demolition. The kind of project that could set up a person for comfortable retirement or, in Jaime's case, fund a major expansion of her operation. The preliminary meeting was held at the state office in Denver. Jaime and I drove up together, reviewing our presentation notes and feeling cautiously optimistic. Our proposal was solid, or track record stellar, and our combined expertise exactly what the project required. Asterisk, Marcus was already in the conference room when we arrived, along with his team. He greeted men professionally enough, but when he looked at Jamie, I saw something calculating in high size. Miss Hill, he said, extending a hand that held hers just a moment too long. I've heard great things about your operation. The meeting itself went well. Our presentation was polished, our answers to questions confident and detailed. But I noticed Marcus watching us, particularly noting the easy way Jaime and I worked together, the subtle signs of intimacy that people who know each other, well, can't entirely hide. Asterisk, after the formal presentation, there was the usual mingling period over coffee and pastries. I was talking to one of the state engineers when I noticed Marcus had cornered Jaime near the windows. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see her face growing tighter, more controlled. When she glanced toward me, there was something. In her expression, anger, but also a kind of protective determination. Asterisk, later, driving home, she was unusually quiet. "What did Marcus say to you?" I finally asked. She was silent for so long, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then he made me an offer. My stomach dropped. "What kind of offer?" "A partnership, web construction, and Carson Quarry." He said he could guarantee us the highway contract and 3 other major projects over the next 5 years. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. All I had to do was distance myself from certain professional intentions that might be seen as unstable. Asterisk, the blood roared in my ears. "He wanted you to break up with me?" He said the state committee had concerns about professionalism, about whether our personnel relationships might compromise the integrity of joint projects. He said if I was serious about my career, I needed to make serious choices. Asterisk, and what did you tell him? She pulled over to the side of the road, put the truck in park, and turned to face me. Her eyes were blazing with an anger I'd never seen before. I told him that my personal life was none of his goddamn business, and that if the state had concerns about professionalism, they were welcome to review our work record, which speaks for itself. Her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. Then I told him that if he ever approached me with that kind of ultimatum again, he'd find himself on the wrong end of a sexual harassment lawsuit. Asterisk God, she was magnificent in her anger. Fierce, and sure and completely uncompromising. "But Jaime," I said, hating myself for even voicing the doubt, "that contract could transform your busyness?" "Maybe, and maybe I'd spend the next 20 years wondering if I earned it through my work or through my willingness to sacrifice the people I love." She reached over and took my hand. "I know which version of myself I want to live with." Asterisk, we didn't get the highway contract. It went to Marcus Webb, despite our superior proposal. The message was clear. There are consequences for refusing to play by other people's rules, but something else happened too. Word got around about Marcus's ultimatum and James' response. And while we lost that contract, we started getting calls. From smaller companies, from women-owned businesses, from people who admired what we represented. We didn't get rich, but we got something better. We got to keep our integrity intact. Asterisk. There's something to be said for surviving your first real test as a couple. It bonds you in ways that easy times can't. After the Marcus Webb situation, Jaime and I settled into something deeper than infatuation, more complex than simple love. We became partners in the truest sense. Asterisk, she moved in with me 8 months after we met. Though moved in makes it sound more formal than it was. Really, she just gradually left more and more of her things at my house. Until one day, we realized she hadn't slept at her own place in 3 weeks. "This is ridiculous," she said one morning, standing in my kitchen wearing my robe and drinking coffee from her favorite mug, the one she claimed was temporary 2 months earlier. "I'm paying rent on a place I never see. You could always move in officially," I suggested, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. She grinned. "Are you asking me to live with you, Rebecca Green?" "I'm asking you to acknowledge that you already are." Asterisk, we merged our lives the way we approached our work, carefully, thoughtfully, but with growing confidence. She brought youth and innovation to my established routines. I brought stability and experience to her occasionally impulsive enthusiasms. She taught me to use social media to market my services, something that had seemed impossibly complicated before she showed me how simple it could be. I taught her the fine art of long-term planning, of building a business that could weather economic storms, asterisk, but more than the practical things. We taught each other about love at different life stages. She showed me that passion doesn't diminish. With age, if you're with the right person, it just becomes more focused, more intense. I showed her that love doesn't have to be desperate or consuming to be real, that the strongest foundations are built slowly, with attention to detail. We worked together more and more, our professional partnership as natural as our persona alone. Companies started hiring Green and Hill as a team, knowing that what they'd get was a level of coordination and expertise that neither of us could provide alone. Asterisk. The Riverside Shopping Center project was our masterpiece. A complex demolition that required bringing down a 1960s department store without damaging the historic building's one other side. It was the kind of job that could make or break reputations. I designed the blast pattern, but Jaime identified the structural weaknesses I'd missed. She suggested the quarry equipment modifications that made the debris removal twice as efficient. When we triggered the charges on that cold February morning, the building came down in exactly the pattern we'd planned, settling into its own footprint like it was lying down to sleep. Asterisk, the video went viral, if you can believe that. Perfect controlled demolition got over 2 million views on YouTube. Suddenly, we were getting calls from all over the country, but that success brought its own challenges. Success has a way of putting a spotlight on everything you'd rather keep. Private asterisk fame, even minor fame, is a peculiar thing when you're in a relationship that people find noteworthy. The trade magazines wanted to interview us. The local news wanted to do a feature. Everyone was fascinated by the professional partnership, but I could see the unasked questions in their eyes. The breaking point came with the documentary. Avila's filmmaker from Denver had gotten interested in women in traditionally male industries. She wanted to follow several women over the course of a year, documenting their challenges and successes. I was flattered to be included until I realized that her real interest wasn't in my work, it was in my relationship with Jaime. The age gap adds such an interesting dynamic, she explained during our first interview. It raises questions about power, about mentorship versus romance, about what draws peer pleasure across generational lines. Asterisk, I should have ended the interview right there. But I was 62 by then, and I'd spent 4 years learning to be proud of what Jaime and I had built together. I thought I could handle a few invasive questions. I was wrong. Asterisk, the documentary painted me as a predator and Jaime as a victim, despite all evidence to the contrary. They interviewed former colleagues of mine, people who barely knew me, and got them to speculate about my pattern of relationships with younger women. Never mind that I'd been with Melanie for 20 years and had never shown interest in anyone significantly younger before Jaime. They interviewed Marcus Webb, who made veiled suggestions about inappropriate workplace relations and professional misconduct. They found a psychologist who'd never met a therapist to discuss the problematic power dynamics in age gap relationships. But the worst part, the part that still makes me angry, was how they portrayed Jaime. Despite her clear, articulate explanations of her own agency, her own choices, they kept suggesting she'd been somehow manipulated or coerced. They edited her words to make her sound naive, uncertain, like a child who didn't understand what she'd gotten herself into. When the documentary aired, I watched Jaime's face throughout the hour-long character assassination. She sat perfectly still, her jaw getting tighter and tighter, until I thought she might crack a tooth. Asterisk afterward. In the silence of our living room, she looked at me with eyes that held a kind of wary determination I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," she said. My heart stopped. This was it. This was where she realized that being with me cost too much, that the scrutiny and judgment weren't worth whatever she got from our relationship. Asterisk. "If you want to end this," I started, but she cut me off. "And Miss Rebecca, did you watch the same documentary I did?" I nodded, confused. "Did you see the part where I talked about the precision of your work? Where I explained how you've revolutionized safety protocols and controlled demolition? Where I described the respect you've earned from every serious professional in this industry? They edited most of that out." "Exactly." Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "They edited out everything that showed you as the accomplished, respected professional you are, and they edited out everything that showed me as a competent adult, capable of making my own choices. You know what that tells me?" Asterisk. "It tells me that what we have threatens people. It threatens their assumptions about how women should age, about who gets to be seen as desirable, about who gets to make unconventional choices and be supported in them." She stood up, pacing to the window and back. "And if what we have threatens people that much, maybe it's because we're doing something great.